Yeah, I think it's actually a really exciting time right now. I think the public is ready for exploring other types of sensors. The groundwork was laid by Nintendo with their games controller, then the Kinect and the Move, and then of course cell phones with gyros, accelerometers. These are all fantastic sensors that were added to create more immersive experiences. And I think in particular in gaming, the public is willing to try new sensors that make the experience more immersive.
Okay. Right here, just strictly from the consumer and kind of retail perspective, this strikes me as a category that is going to be defined by the term neurogaming within industry, but that term will not, and should not make its way in front of consumers as part of your value proposition or your pitch for your product or your service, because it emotes all sorts of scary, negative reactions from consumers that you're going to be doing something with the inside of their bodies that they don't know about. So, regardless of what how we define it, just my point for saying that is keep the consumers in mind and don't call this the next great neurogaming platform or the next great neurogaming device, because you won't sell.
The point to be made here is that, of course, decomposing the EEG signal is something that can be done very quickly, so you can react to the ongoing EEG activity in the brain quite rapidly. And of course, there's also more advanced methodologies that allow you to decompose the brain data into compartment spaces. Things like independent component analysis and so on can be primed, for instance, on the basis of your EEG, let's say during the initial stages of you learning how to play a game, and then what the system does is it sort of like decomposes the data into individual sources that can be indicative of some particular aspect of your responses to the game. So there's various methodologies that allow us nowadays to tap into the actual content of the EEG quite rapidly and quite exactly also. So there's great promise in using EEG in gaming. However, the one thing that EEG does not tell us on its own is basically what it is processing at the moment. It's that what that is missing. We see that it is processing something. Now, in situations where essentially you are trying to focus, you're trying to be calm, then of course it's your internal state that you're trying to modulate. So then I would have to go back on myself and say, well, then we know what we are processing, right? It's the internal state. However, if we try to react to something that's going on in the scenery of the game, or let's say the mechanisms of the game, then of course we would also have to have the input from different other modalities, such as, for instance, eye tracking, because essentially what that does is it tells us with very high accuracy which particular portion of the screen the person was looking at when that particular change in the spectral topography or the spectral content of the EEG was ongoing, right? So again, my credo here is that EEG is a very, very valid modality, but you likely need some other modality to actually tell the system, tell the gaming system what was being processed at the time.
I can't speak at all to anything regarding EEG, except as a content creator. If I were at the receiving end of all of this data that you had done research on, on a game I had worked on, it'd be really interesting to me, because I'm really interested in like the experience we tell the player we're giving him versus the experience he really has. Like, for example, I gave a talk recently where I addressed this in more detail, but I talked about the idea that we often tell the player he's the hero of the story. And he is driving the action in terms of gameplay, but he rarely is taking on the true role of hero. The emotional experience he's having is usually, I can do whatever I want, whenever I want. He's sort of wanting to experiment with how he can interact with the environment that he's in. And when you compare that with what we would consider a hero in real life, the emotional experience that person would have is usually one involving terror, despair, frustration. Being a hero in a true sense is an incredibly emotionally grueling experience, one that most of us don't want to do after work for an hour on our couch. And so I think it would be really useful. It could be a key that unlocks a lot of doors in terms of what kind of experiences. There would be more congruence between what we say we're giving them and what we're really giving them. I think it would give us more opportunities to create different kinds of experiences and be more honest about what we're inviting players to do.
you know, I think Google Glass is going to be one of those things that we probably may all raise our hands today and say, yeah, if they were handing them out at the door, we'd take them. But would you really walk around every day and wear them versus if it was integrated into existing products that you already had, like your, you know, your ski goggles or your running glasses or your reading glasses, and you could actually have it be invisible, that actually makes it more palatable for users. So I think the conservatism and vanity of consumers is not to be understated in this category, because I think that plays on a lot of those consumer fears around these things.